Hey there, welcome back to Mythic Mind Games. Today we're going to be wrapping up the Elder Scrolls and Philosophy series with our general chat on Skyrim's DLC, Dragonborn, and Dawnguard. Now, technically I do still owe you one philosophy video on this material, but right now I'm into the Silmarillion material for that Mythic Mind course, and so I'll get back around to that last philosophy video already. I already have something in mind that I want to talk about, specifically regarding Dragonborn and philosophy, so we'll get there eventually. But for now, this is going to be the last episode in this series, and then moving forward to Mythic Mind Games, we're going to be doing, I think we've got 5 episodes coming up of just different things that people in the Mythic Mind community wanted to be talking about. And so it'll be a little bit of an eclectic run for the next few episodes. And so next time we're going to be looking at Expedition 33 as the first in this run of various games. And then after that, we'll be getting back to our Final Fantasy series. So now let's get to our episode on Skyrim's DLC, Dawnguard and Dragonborn. I hope you enjoy. All right, ready to talk some Dawnguard and Dragonborn?
And Hearthfire, don't forget.
And yes, and we can talk about the houses that you've built or something. I don't know.
No.
Welcome to the Elder Scrolls and Philosophy, as we wrap up with our last live discussion of this study, although, as we've talked about, we'll revisit some of this material at some point. But in this one, we're talking about the Skyrim DLC, specifically Dawnguard and Dragonborn. And I say we just go in release order, and so we can start with Dawnguard and then hit up Dragonborn. So, initial thoughts. I like Dawnguard. I really liked it when it came out. I like the Elder Scrolls vampire stuff. There wasn't a lot of that in Oblivion. I mean, you could become a vampire, and there are some vampires, but it's not a lot of like vampire-centric quest stuff, lore stuff, which you do have back in Morrowind, where you can even you join you can join a certain clan of vampires and have unique quests and whatnot, and obviously in Morrowind you can't really go too far with that. It's pretty isolated to that dynamic of the game, but nonetheless I appreciate being able to get back into more vampire stuff, and had the option of joining them, had the option of playing the vampire hunter paladin type. So I don't know, I enjoy it from a gameplay angle. Doesn't say a whole lot about the philosophy or lore stuff, but I enjoy it. That's my basic first impression of opening thoughts here. Tyler, tell me some opening thoughts here about Dawnguard.
I think one thing I enjoy Dawnguard doing, aside from kind of what you've already said, is they kind of leaned into another kind of character study with Serana a little bit, trying to work their writing skills a little bit and their storytelling a little bit through a different character, and actually having like a real character arc for someone, even though like you may not always, depending on the playthrough, get to lean into the whole thing. But it's interesting being able to see that, because I mean Bethesda in general, they definitely kind of lean into having more real kind of companions with real stories and stuff, kind of because even like with Fallout 4, they have much more, companion-led centric stories, and then just working through later installments like Starfield does as well, where they really try to, even though I don't really like any of them, but they really try to tell stories through characters, and it is kind of an interesting way to look at it. And also being able to experience Elder Scrolls through the eyes of somebody else too is also just another interesting thing. The eyes of someone in the game can just provide just a different outlook than being being your character and just kind of telling and being your story. And just like kind of like with Oblivion did with Martin in a way too, where we're experiencing that. But yeah, just initial thoughts there.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Serana is definitely a unique contribution to Skyrim. I mean, I can't think of any other companions in the game that actually have anything like meaningful personality or narrative arcs. they're just there to carry your burdens, right? That's what they're there for. And so yeah, Serana definitely does add that unique dynamic. Um, Ian, tell us something about Dawnguard.
Serana is the only character in Skyrim with a character arc.
That's true. Yes.
Um, it's been a hot minute since I played Dawnguard. Uh,
Same.
so um I don't remember much of it. I plan to get to it. Obviously, that didn't happen. I remember it being I remember thinking, this is Serana's story, kind of like what we were talking about. This is Serana's story, not really your story, because you're kind of ferrying her around, and she's the one kind of doing all of the talking. Kind of with every character you interact with. The other thing I noticed about this story, and this was kind of a pet peeve of mine, was there's Elder Scrolls lying around everywhere, which I just found to be, really, really goofy. So, because it's like, I mean, it's the namesake of the series, but they're also supposed to be like, these incredibly rare, powerful things, these fragments of creation, kind of manifested in a scroll form that you can't really read, and those who can read them, they go blind, right? But I remember it being such a big deal in Oblivion, where the culmination of the Thieves Guild heist is we're going to scale White Gold Tower and we're going to steal an Elder Scroll. And like what a big deal that was, because like these things just like you get the sense that they're just not to really to be found anywhere. I think the Dwemer Empire was in possession of one, which I believe actually comes up in Dawnguard. But you get an Elder Scroll as part of the main plot in Skyrim, which I didn't really begrudge, the game for. I thought that was, perfectly cool. But then you wake up Serana, and Serana has an Elder Scroll, and then it's like, oh, we need to get like, doesn't her mom have an Elder Scroll? Is that
Yes.
right, Tyler?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like, oh, so her mom has an Elder Scroll. I can't. It felt like can can somebody correct me on the number, because I didn't check before coming in here. I didn't think to. I feel like by the time we get to the end of all of Skyrim's stories, there's like five or six Elder Scrolls in your back pocket.
There's
And to
only
me,
three.
there is okay,
Yeah,
three.
there's only three
Okay,
because they
okay,
they
it's
reused
oh,
the one from the main story
got it.
as part of the story. So
Got it, got it. So I thought that was absolutely crazy. Um Other than that, no, yeah, Dawnguard was cool. I liked it. The significance of Oreo, or I'm just gonna, he's Oreo now. He's Oreo. The significance of Oreo's bow just like went completely over my head because I didn't know the lore. And again, these games don't really give it to you like Morrowind does. So there's like a lot of significant things that are going on that just kind of that probably just fly over most people's heads. But yeah. So Dawnguard's like that's my opener. Dawnguard's cool.
Yeah, the Elder Scrolls issue you're bringing up, it kind of reminds me of what you brought up in the Fallout 4 chat about how in 3 the whole point is about this water purification thing, and then in 4 you can just build them in your settlements left and right. It's like it kind of trivializes the whole point of the previous narrative. And I think that largely could be said of what we get in Skyrim, maybe Dawnguard in particular, relative to the thief heist in Oblivion, which I thought about that as well, because what made that such a cool thing is that buildup of you're getting all these different things, and you don't even really know why until finally you find out. It's like I picture Nick Cage, we're gonna steal the Elder Scroll. And that's what like, makes it such a big thing.
It makes it such a it's one of the things that just makes the Thieves Guild in Oblivion just one of the greatest quest lines.
Hmm.
Not just an Elder Scrolls. I'd say maybe in gaming, but definitely in Elder Scrolls. And it just I look at Skyrim's Thieves Guild, and it just makes me realize it's just so lacking. by comparison. But that's, we're not here to talk about the Thieves Guild. We're here to talk about Dawnguard.
Right. Um, and, Jacob, are you there? Do you have anything that you want to say about Dawnguard?
Yeah, I was just gonna preface it by saying that I think it's everything that I'm gonna say in this entire discussion is based upon memories that are from like a decade ago. It's been a very
Sure.
long time since I've touched any of these DLCs, but uh, as for Dawnguard, I think I actually think I prefer it over Dragonborn, which is I know kind of a wild statement. A lot of people prefer Dragonborn.
No, I think I agree with you. Continue.
Yeah, it's just I like how much lore it drops. I'm not a huge fan of the whole vampire concept in general. Like, I mean, it's just never been that much of an. It hasn't appealed that much to me, but I do like how much lore is dropped in it. You get to see Soul Cairn for a bit. Of course, as Ian said, the Oriole's bow or Oreo's bow, sorry. But no, I like a lot of the lore that is added in it, and it also does a pretty, like you guys were saying, with Serana, it does a pretty good job of showing that not all the vampires are, just these, you know, one-sided animals essentially. Um, and I do think it also did lay the not really a precedent, but the desire for Bethesda to continue writing more complex companion storylines for better or for worse in the future games. So yeah, I just in general I really did enjoy Dawnguard back in the day, and I definitely need to replay it.
Something that I was kind of thinking of that Andrew reminded me of when he said something, and then you, Jacob, kind of reminded me again was I was thinking about the Count of Skingrad in Oblivion, who spoilers is also a vampire, and he's also kind of an example of the nuanced character type where this is a guy who is he is a good man who kind of keeps his nature both secret and in check, and he really he's a character that you almost unlike all the other counts in the game, he's a character you almost never see because he just keeps himself not even like publicly in court. He just kind of keeps himself hidden, and it's very difficult to get an appointment with him, if at all. Uh, but you get to talk with him in the Mages Guild quest, and then he comes up most prominently in the Vampire quest, which some people consider to be a very long and tedious. The Cure Vampirism quest in Oblivion, some people consider it to be kind of like a long and tedious quest, but it has a very rewarding culmination where you get to where the Count of Skingrad is actually helping you cure your vampirism, and but he's not just doing it for you, and you find out at the end he's not doing it for himself. He doesn't care about himself. He's kind of content to do things the way he's doing them. But he's getting the cure for his wife. You find out you have like this reveal. He has a wife. His wife is a vampire, and she hates it. She's miserable, and she just wants to die, but she can't die because she's a vampire. So she's in a constant state of torpor, basically. And when you get the cure at the end, you actually get to be with the count at his wife's bedside, and he cures her of her vampirism, and in doing because she was already in torpor, in doing that and becoming mortal again, she just dies as she is cured, and he just kind of he lets go of somebody that he's been holding on to, all this time, that he loves, but he lets her go, lets her finally be at peace, be cured and be at peace, and just kind of and let her and finally just give her what she wants and let her die and lets her die. And then he just kind of like, all right, you know, you fulfilled your end of the bargain. I fulfilled mine. I'd like to be alone for a while. And it was just, I remember that just really stuck out to me as just that the Count of Skingrad is just an incredible character, like vampire in the setting.
Yeah, it's a good. I mean, even if it's not Dawnguard specific, it's a good vampire connection. And honestly, I don't think I ever did the Cure Vampirism quest because in Oblivion and Skyrim, it's so easy to live as a vampire. If I'd go that route, then I figure, why get rid of it? Um, but yeah, and I will say that I agree with Jacob that I like the additions to the lore that you get in Dawnguard regarding vampires, soul care, and all that stuff. Although, as I've talked about in the Discord, I hate going to the soul cairn. I get the same feeling I get when I'm playing Dragon Age and I know I have to go into the Fade. It's like it's slow, it's meandering. It's something that I feel like should be really cool, but just isn't.
I feel like the Fade and the Deep Roads
Yeah,
are just like,
same
but
kind of
yeah, no,
feeling.
yeah, yeah, definitely know what you mean. Yeah, I don't think anybody likes the Soul Cairn. The Soul Cairn is one of those things where it's really cool if you like. It's really only cool if you know what it is
Hmm.
and kind of like its place and it's like its place in its history in the world. Otherwise, because yeah, it's not. It's I don't know. Does anybody else want to say anything about the Soul Cairn or the Ideal Masters?
Well, maybe we should review. I mean, somebody who
Yeah.
naturally knows the lore a bit better than I do, perhaps, or remembers it, because it's been a while for me and I haven't done a whole lot of review.
When you get soul trapped, it's specifically the black soul gems is because that's the only one that's large enough to capture a soul of a man or mer. But it's the place where the souls go, and then it's also kind of the line of the ideal masters, which yeah, I don't like I said, I don't really know too much more other than just like yeah, there's a close tie between the ideal masters and necromancy in general. And essentially like a lot of necromancers at the peak of their powers like to try to get in touch with the ideal masters, and usually they get pretty messed up with it. And I think, I mean, we see just some footprints of their actions through like, oh, what's Serana's mom's name, Valerica or something, when she strikes a deal and gets trapped because like something about like since she's a vampire, she'll never die, and so she's going to be stuck in this place for eternity. Or even the dragon Durnavir, like in his quest for necromancy, like he also like gets trapped there by the ideal masters, and the only way that he can be set free is when you shout him back into the overworld, which I mean it's like really fun to do because he's a sick looking dragon. But yeah, but I mean any deeper than that, no, I don't have too much more than that.
All I remember is that the Ideal Masters are kind of like this, ivory tower inner circle of just like necromancer incels that you just made their own used their powerful necromancy to just kind of make their own pocket plane. I want to say the story of the Ideal Masters and the Soul Cairn comes up in Battlespire. I think it's
Hmm.
Battlespire. I'm not sure. That's where it first came up. And so you deal there's a story where you deal with where you kind of deal with those guys, and it's they're I mean they're jerks. They've got their own ideal way of doing things, which is not so ideal for everybody else.
Yeah, it's
Um,
like I wonder where they got the name the Ideal Masters. I mean, ideal like that that means something.
it does, but I don't remember. I
Yeah.
can't give you an answer. I feel like I feel like this is like a really good segue to talk to continue the subject of just necromancy and vampires and like Molag Bal, kind of like in
Hmm.
general, because it's all connected and relevant to what's going on. Tyler, I thought you said you had some notes on Molag Bal or some of that stuff.
So I I d so I didn't get too much into the deep lore stuff. The most of my notes are tying to just some of like understanding the philosophical or just trying to grapple with a lot of just some of the philosophical implications of like vampirism and what it does to the person that becomes a vampire. And this definitely tied in a lot more, primary world sources.
Yeah.
Uh, I've been reading through Constellation of Philosophy and Boethius, and so like the one thing I came across, and I was reading book three, and I just came across like when talking about what it means to be like a living creature in unity, like what that looks like, and how, just unity of the body and the soul, and how vampirism, you suck one out, right? So you're sucking out the soul, and you have this body, and so I don't know. I kind of just started running with that for a while, but I don't
Hmm.
know if we're if we want to go there at this point. But I just had a really, just really had some thoughts on that, I guess.
I mean, if I get my esoteric rabbit hole, I think you can have an esoteric rabbit hole. But that's
Yeah,
my
what?
opinion.
So I mean, yeah. So just I think just like the vampirism gives us a look at like what it means to like give up our soul, and what that could do to our bodies in general. Because you can see that vampires obviously are given these are um are in a through obtaining new power, they're becoming weaker in a lot of different
Hmm.
ways, right? And so and so like obviously vampires they have a they don't, the sun isn't very kind to them, fire isn't very kind to them, and silver as well. So you're looking at these, and also they're pretty much a slave to their thirst. And I just found that just like that thought really interesting, that when we remove the soul, once it's very similar with the werewolves, where you're becoming a primal being, you're becoming a very like you're becoming a beast, and giving into these uh to what is human and unnatural way of living, by becoming more like, the beast, while trying to say that you're given this power, and also the inability to die through natural causes as well. It's just these curses that you're given that are seen as power, and what that can do to the human state. And so after doing that, I kind of was able to dive deeper into like the character study of Harkon a little bit more about his stuff. But yeah, just wanted to leave that there for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, you're making a good point, and I appreciate the symbolism of the vampire relative to the sorts of things that Boethius talks about, right? That, Boethius, for anyone listening who isn't familiar, I mean, he was a Christian Roman statesman, senator, philosopher, after the deposition of the last Western Roman emperor. So he's operating under this barbarian foreign king. But nonetheless, he's living his life according to reason, according to virtue. Everything seems to be going pretty well for him in the domain of fortune. But then, through no fault of his own, that all gets stripped away as some false accusations are brought against him, regarding like, sedition against the king who's in charge. He's accused of like, witchcraft, all these sorts of things that are just thrown at him, really because he earned some political enemies by uncovering some corruption in the Senate. And so he gets everything stripped away. He's in prison, he's in house arrest, awaiting his execution, and he's dealing with this question of, like, how do I make sense out of this? Why is it that the wicked seem to prosper while the righteous tend to suffer? It's a question you find straight out of scripture, but he's dealing with it in his own very personal kind of way because of his personal situation. And he talks about the fact that, as Augustine says, that, the wicked, though they may reign, are actually slaves to as many masters as they have vices. Because the reality is that there are all kinds of things we can do that give us the appearance of power over changing fortune. This is why wicked people can seem to prosper in this life, through wicked means. But the reality is we never have control over fortune, over what happens. And it doesn't matter how much you guard your health, for example. You can still get cancer, get hit by a car. It doesn't matter, how good you are with your money. I mean, obviously, we should be good stewards of our money, but at the same time, any number of things can strike to take away your fortune through no fault of your own. And so we never really have power over the movement of circumstance as such. But what we do always have power, the only true human power, is power over ourselves, right? And so real freedom, real power comes through the path of virtue. Whereas just giving ourselves over to vice, giving ourselves over to consumption, as you said, it makes us less real, less people, less powerful, as now we are entirely dependent on the satisfaction of our base drives. Aristotle talks about the same sort of stuff, where he says that man is situated so that, rightly ordered, he is the strongest of the beasts, the strongest of living things, the best of living things. But when he is disordered, he becomes worse than the beast because he's armed with reason, but in a kind of reason that creates a hole in existence. And that's Kierkegaard. I mean, I'm kind of jumping all over the place because they're all making the same sort of point. When Kierkegaard says that death is not actually the worst thing that can happen. No, the real sickness unto death is despair, the kind of despair that is a living death of foregoing hope of the real, hope of existence. And so what you're doing is you're living, and maybe you even seem to be prospering, but in reality, you're not giving anything to the world. You're just consuming at all times. And so that gives us this vampire idea. And I appreciate what Ian brought up about the countess, I suppose, of Skingrad, the count's wife, that her healing was her death because that is actually a freedom relative to the living death of her despair in vampirism. And so I think there's something really significant going on there. And so I didn't really add a whole lot to the conversation, but I was kind of riffing off and echoing what Tyler was bringing up, that I think that there's a lot of merit to that sort of analysis. Um, Now, what were we going to say about Harkon?
Through the story, you know, once again, I think it's Valerica, his wife, you know, brings up this idea, like she has this vision of like, so let's say Harkon succeeds and he's able to shoot out the sun, which is kind of the main goal of Harkon here, is to get Ariel's bow to, or Oreo's bow to dip some arrows into some of the Daughters of Cold Harbor's blood, which will essentially give them the power to erase the power of the sun, allowing vampires to essentially in their full power roam free in the world. And so Valerica sits back and said, okay, so if Harkon succeeds, um, this will be the end of vampires because the people of Tamriel will now seek out more actively to hunt out the vampires to fight them. And so for Harkon then to continue to self-preserve as and to grow and to he has to commit more evil and more sin, and there will never be. And so in Boethius and the constellation, it talks about how, the sin begets sin, that there will be, you can't achieve happiness, you can't achieve that fulfillment through committing sin. It's just going to beget more having to commit sin over and over again. This is in the cycle, that this path of destruction. So essentially, no matter what happens, it seems as though Harkon is walking the path of his own destruction, through his seeking of more power, through his seeking of being able to dominate in a sense, or even just to be able to live in accordance with what he believes is the way to live.
Yeah, I mean, evil ultimately consumes itself. I mean, it's certainly a very Christian idea. I mean, we see that in that the greatest victory is the death of Christ, right? Evil ultimately consumes itself, um, or this to pull in Tolkien's, some of the tease some of the Silmarillion stuff that Ungoliant is this creature that consumes light and ultimately ends up essentially consuming herself, more or less. And because when your whole life is identified by hunger, by what can I consume, rather than what can I receive of the reality that is already given to me, right? That's the Boethian idea, that all we really need for beatitude is already available to us because existence itself is fundamentally good, and you can follow the great chain of being, of existence, ultimately to the one source of existence, who is God, the source of all beatitude. And so that beatitude is always available to you in any circumstance. It doesn't matter if you find yourself, at the top of the world, you're the emperor, excuse me, the emperor of Rome. It doesn't matter if you are falsely imprisoned and you have your entire fortune taken away and you're waiting your unjust execution. The reality is that by being part of this chain of being that finds its way back in the independent existence and the goodness of God, beatitude is always available to you if only you would receive it. And so it's the difference between receiving what's already there and living in accordance with the consumption and making hunger rather than satisfaction your driving impulse. And when hunger is your driving impulse, well, then you're actually seeking more hunger rather than satisfaction of that which you hunger for. And so in the end, you just consume even yourself. You become a shadow of a person, to Now pulling some great divorce imagery. Man, I'm just all over the place with my references today.
It's a really like I was thinking about how with vampirism, like it really is in a lot of ways, it's a really good picture of kind of like how, you know, sin works. So it's like this, there is the how evil works. There is this promise of kind of like, oh, this thing that will give you what you want and what will satisfy you, but you're kind of like, what Jesus says, you're always going to go back to the well. You're always going to go back to the well for more water. Well, in the case of the vampire, they're always going back for, you know, uh it depends on the culture, but typically it's blood. It's always more blood. And like with vampires specifically, there's something about them that is very about their nature. It's very it's very relationship focused. Like it has to do with relationships. It has to do with to one another, like sexuality, things like that. And just like the kind of be like being a being like being a predator, being an abuser, and you're this, you are a slave to, like, this thirst, that we've been talking about. Like it's not a promise of never ending life. It's a promise of never ending destruction, and it affects everybody, just absolutely everybody around you. And how there's just an absolutely oppressive and parasitic nature to it, which is just, very much what, it's very much what Molag Bal is about. Very, and like, as far as Elder Scrolls goes, because he is the origin of vampires. Don't look up the origin of vampires in Elder Scrolls. It's like, it's kind of adult only. Like, it's not pretty. Like, it's really not pretty. But not unless you got a strong stomach for that sort of thing. But it really, but what it does further showcase, like, I bring, part of the reason I bring this up is that it further showcases that idea of just like that, just completely, you know, debased sense of just, oppressive and predatory power. Yeah, that just kind of like, makes these false promises, I guess. I didn't write this bit down. This is me going off the cuff.
Well, I would just say it's a twisting of very beautiful things, right?
Yes.
Because it's
Hmm.
this taking it. So I mean, to fulfill the thirst. I mean, like you think of more traditionally in other mediums where we see the like pictures of vampires where they're seducing a woman and
Hmm.
bringing them in and then using that. Oh, yeah, and just abusing a lot of the beautiful things that can make living so so filled with joy and fulfilling. It's just that it once again further shows what sin and this evil nature can bring about, that some of these great intimate moments are now replaced with this of fulfilling a need of thirst of needing to devour, rather than truly connecting, and so further isolating the vampires, which vampires aren't as isolated in the Elder Scrolls world, but more traditionally, it's a very isolating thing to be in.
Yeah, there's this very, like, it's interesting because I was reading somewhere, like, I don't remember exactly. I was reading somewhere that like, apparently there is speculation or evidence to show that in a previous Kalpa, Molag Bal may have at one point been actually like a god of love, who was like twisted into like this horrible reversal of that, kind of like in the current iteration of the Elder Scrolls universe. And it's interesting because, so what I'm about to say here, like, I'm not trying to like make Molech Ball look sympathetic in any way, shape, or form. He is like, he is like, built from the ground up to be like this irredeemable, just like one of the just like the worst of the worst, some of the worst of the Daedra. But what's really, really interesting is that in his transformation, like there is kind of like this brutal cycle of like an abusee becomes an abuser where like there's like all like a lot of the other none of the other data are like Molag Bal either, and they really like to pick on him just like in just kind of like horrible ways. Like if you actually read like the 36 sermons of Vivek himself like took advantage of Molag Bal. Like I'm not going to get into the details of it, we don't need to do that, but he took advantage of Molag Bal so that he could learn basically the secrets of Kim. I don't remember like all the stories or the details, but like Azura took advantage of Molag Bal. Meridia took advantage of Molag Bal. And it was like one, and there's actually something, there's like an interesting aside there when it comes to kind of like evil and its desires. Apparently Molag Bal has kind of like his own kind of like love or desire for Meridia, who herself was once kind of like an angel of light. Um, and I always thought I found that really, really interesting because it reminded me of like Morgoth pining for Elbereth, kind of pining for Elbereth's light, and how like she would shun him. And there's this idea in Tolkien of kind of like evil like does both desiring and hating goodness. Like you see that with Sauron, you see that with Morgoth, and you see it with Sauron. You see it with even Gollum. You see it with the ring wraiths. You see it even with the Barrow-wights. Kind of like just like the loving and hating of blood that no longer courses through their veins. Like blood in this context, which is like a thing of life. It is we always think of blood in violent contexts, but here it is it is a good and like beautiful thing that makes us what we are, makes us alive. And so it's really, so I thought that was really, really interesting that you kind of have like this thing where like even in Baal's horribleness, like he kind of desires Meridia's light, but like he can't be anything other than what he is. And Meridia kind of like and Meridia does what she does. um and it it kind of like, and it's just like it's one of those things where like all of these characters are actively making Molag Bal even worse than he already is, like perpetuating the cycle.
Yeah, that's interesting. And specifically for Gollum, to bring up this principle you were bringing up, that Gandalf says that he loved and hated the ring as he loved and hated himself. And I think that that is a good way of getting into this kind of perversion of the goodness that exists around us, even the very goodness of life itself. It's focused on consumption rather than the kind of giving and beholding that's necessary for active fellowship. And it reminds me of the same kind of thing that I make in just about every context when I'm having philosophy conversations. And that is the major difference between the classical world or the pre-modern world and the modern world. And yes, I'm about to call postmoderns vampires because like you go to the pre-modern world, you go to, I mean, even like the ancient pagans, the Greeks, the Romans, and certainly into the Christian period, then the medieval period, you have this idea that we exist within a given context that is real and that is more real than we are as particular beings in that context, even as the broad narrative, the broad story is more real than an individual particular character or event. And in fact, it is the story that gives reality to the character. It's the story that gives reality to the event. And so too, our task in the path of virtue is to discover the place that we have within the broader context of the story of reality. And so Plato, Aristotle, they're worried about or they're concerned rather about pursuing the good. How do I live in the way that a human is supposed to live? And as I pursue that goal, I find myself more connected with the story of reality. And by extension, I find myself more connected with other people. Our fellowship becomes real because that fellowship partakes of the real, the capital R real. Now, as we move further into the modern period of thought, and especially into the postmodern period of thought, but really beginning with Descartes, who, Descartes, the father of modernity, he doesn't begin with something like God or even the good as an abstract sense. His philosophy begins with himself, right? I think, therefore I am. That is the foundation of his philosophy. And then it's not a big step from there to the postmodern period, where now we're very explicitly going to say, there is no such thing as reality. There's only me. I don't contextualize myself within reality. I contextualize reality within myself. And so now all I can really do is consume. I bring things into myself rather than partaking in a shared reality with the people around me. And so this leads to narcissism, not as a bug, but by design, right? Everything is about me. I have the right to define reality. And you also have the right to define reality, which means we have no place of meeting between us, right? And so this leads to a kind of vampirism, which, in the past would have been seen as a defect. Like there's something wrong with you if you are isolating yourself from the world around you, if you're isolating yourself from a shared reality. In fact, that's what the word idiot means. Idios, it means like it means your own, like you have your own understanding of things that's different from the way that things actually are. But now we're trained to be idiots by design, right? To be isolated, to be radically individualistic, while at the same time there's a lot of push for collectivism, and how that works together. I don't know. It's kind of irrational. But that's the name of the game in the era of postmodernism. Now, all that's super abstract relative to the vampires of the Elder Scrolls. But at the same time, I think that there is a correlation in that the life of consumption, the life of defining reality within myself, it is isolating, it is despairing. And so even if you gain a certain degree of power, well, you lose the significance that makes any kind of power actually valuable. You end up consuming yourself in the end. Um, Now, are the writers of Elder Scrolls trying to say that? Not necessarily, but in portraying vampires, I think that they are providing a good case study for that sort of life.
I thought Jacob was going to say something.
Uh, I made a quick joke about you were explaining the meaning of the word idiot, and I was like, so that explains everything about why I am the way I am. But no,
Oof. Yeah.
but no, I was just one thing I was going to comment on was you were talking about contextualizing reality about around yourself and making it about your perception of reality rather than the shared perception or the shared reality. And I was thinking the thing that immediately made me think of in context of the Elder Scrolls is the whole concept of Kim, because the idea of that is basically you're seeing the way reality actually is. You're just a figment of an imagination in the middle of a dream, and you're telling that realization of reality, no, I am not. I am something completely different. I exist, even though you're saying I don't exist. Everything reality itself is telling that person they don't exist, but they're telling reality, no, I do exist. I'm not just the figment of somebody's imagination. And the ironic part about that is that you look at some of the things that Kirkbride wrote in like the love letter to the fifth era, I believe is what it is, and he essentially tries to uh, say that love is like the key to stopping landfall, which is this big apocalyptic event in Coda and all that. But you know, it, it's just kind of ironic to me that the whole idea of Kim is actually kind of a selfish concept, especially compared to Amaranth, where you're essentially sacrificing yourself to create a quote unquote better reality. Uh, so I just thought that was kind of an interesting, like that was the first thing that came to mind when I was listening to Andrew talk about how putting centering yourself, making reality center around what you believe, and yeah, I don't know if that really made any sense, but
I think it did. You're kind of so like there's a lot of, and I would say it's like I would say it's kind of like a spirit of the age thing. So it's not unique to Elder Scrolls, but a lot of what's kind of going on in the ideas, and they a lot of for a lot of game stories, writers tend to lean into like these self-actualization ideas a lot, just kind of like as a rule, since you are you are playing like the character in the story, and you have like that degree of control over the story and and the world as a player in a video game. So they tend to they tend to lean into those self-actualization ideas kind of like a lot, if only as like a a kind of like a token gesture nod to hey, you're playing a video game. But like, so I think that's like no, like I no I understood what you're saying. I'm assuming that's kind of like what you were talking about there.
Yeah, I was just basically talking about how, just the philosophical concept of Kim more so than
Yeah.
what it actually, practically means in
I
the gameplay.
I think there is a point of nuance that is worth pointing out when we're talking about like Kim and the dream and stuff like that. I think it's not necessarily I don't think I don't think is Kim necessarily realizing that like, oh, it's a dream and so therefore you don't exist. It's not really saying that. Again, like like Kirkbride is kind of talking about the idea of divine hypnagogia as basically he's equating lucid dreaming to playing a game basically. And I think kind of like what he was trying to explain through Vivek and some of these other characters was more specifically like, okay, you realize that you're in the dream of the Godhead, so you can walk away with. And I've like made arguments here and elsewhere for kind of kind of like divine lucid dreaming is something much more real and much more powerful than like mortal lucid dreaming. But like the idea is not so much that you don't exist, it's more like you can look at it one of two ways. Like you can either see yourself as being kind of like in this dream and then come to the conclusion that, oh, I don't exist, at which point you zero sum, which is like an actual thing, which is like an actual state that they describe in the game where like you cease to exist. Or you kind of say like or like you use your ego and you assert your existence and say I am something more, acknowledging kind of like acknowledging your place within kind of like the established order, at which point you become your own like lucid dreamer and exert some control over your surroundings. And that's kind of like reaching Kim, at least the first stage of Kim anyway. But like, so it's still very much that self-actualization idea, but like at the same time it's like it's not really about saying, oh, I don't exist. Like I don't exist is a conclusion you can come to, but and then like if you're not careful, bad things can happen, like within the context of like the metaphysics of the world, you know but or yeah, that I lost my train of thought, sorry.
I mean, yeah, as I argued in my lessons of Vivek video, in my understanding of Kim, which very well may be deficient, it very much seems to me to be a Nietzschean will to power sort of situation where you're looking into the abyss, you're looking into reality as such, and recognizing that it doesn't ultimately have constraints over you unless you allow it to have ultimate constraints over you. That you have the ability to transcend the world as it's given to you and essentially to assert your own values. That's my understanding of what Vivek did. And that's how he became a god of sorts, essentially by willing it to be so. And that's exactly what Nietzsche prescribes. And it feeds right into my picture of postmodern philosophy taken broadly. I mean, there are certain postmoderns that I like. There's certain elements of postmodern philosophy I like, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
taking it broadly, it is this isolating, well, philosophy of idiots. And to me, like that's what Kim seems to be, that sort of self-actualization, so-called, which actually leads to becoming less of an actual self, because the idea of self itself doesn't mean anything.
Kim is so complicated. Like I didn't come here with my Kim notes, but like there is like there is truth in what you're saying there. Like with Kim. Um, I was actually thinking about the something like with regards to vampirism, Ball, and necromancy. Something that stuck out to me with necromancy is there's kind of like a banality of evil idea. We've talked about the more extremes of evil in in this particular context. Necromancy and Elder Scrolls makes me think of the banality of evil because if you notice when it comes to like the conjuration and mysticism schools of magic, like magic items which are very very common in the world of Elder Scrolls, and I believe it was actually Valerian Galarian the Mystic who kind of popularized accessible magic and magic items to like the lower classes, within Elder Scrolls societies. All of those magic items require soul gems to operate. Like just like anything. If you're using like magic anything that like isn't a spell, which like magic itself comes from Aetherius, but if you're powering something, you need a soul gem. Like, and that's how everything in this world operates. And like it is described in multiple sources how the various mechanics of kind of like how of like summoning the dead, like Dunmer spirit ancestors or ghosts or skeletons or whatever, or again just using a soul gem for whatever. Um, it's like this very basically it's not a pleasant experience for the person whose soul is being used or for the person who's being conjured. Like even if there's like even if there is like a semi willingness to it, like in the case of like a Dunmer ancestor spirit, like there are accounts within the Elder Scrolls that actually describe like being summoned or being used as fuel for a magic item as a very unpleasant experience for like whoever soul is like being used for that process. So you're summoning that you're summoning that skeleton or that ghost or even that Dunmer ancestor spirit who is willing to help their descendants, but they're kind of miserable while they're doing it. There's like an unwilling like forcefulness like to it, and kind of like what and like a damage to like your very being that's happening in the process. And it's a practice that is like as much as characters like Archmage Traven in Oblivion or whatever make a big deal about necromancy, and you've got various factions within the Elder Scrolls that have strong opinions on necromancy, there is nevertheless a very common accepted practice of soul gems for most people as batteries. Like there's kind of like this. It's kind of like the again, it's a banality of evil idea where it's like you kind of you pay lip service or opposition to some forms of necromancy, but other versions of necromancy you're okay with. I mean, even if you're using like an animal soul, like that soul of that animal like is suffering. I mean, there's like a whole debate, on whether or not we can find that justifiable. But like it's one of those things where and I just thought of it as just a really fascinating aspect. Just like of like everyday life in the Elder Scrolls, where we're kind of we're something that's taken for granted, like because it's convenient. Like it all like it almost makes me that's a bit of a tangent, but I was thinking of like kind of like Thomas Jefferson's like house. He had like all of these built-in modern conveniences where he could push a button and like a bottle of wine would pop out of the wall. But like what was kind of like making all of that, like what was kind of making all of that stuff possible was like all of these like slaves that many of them were his children, that he had like that he had like in these secret hallways, like between walls, between rooms, kind of like running back and forth, kind of like providing all of these like kind of like all of these like little services throughout his house that like made for actually like something equivocal to like a 20th or 21st century comfortable like uh modern lifestyle and level of comfort, which like in his own letters sometimes he talks like, he acknowledges occasionally and admits his own discomfort about it, but like he's unwilling to give it up because like it's too like it's like it's too comfortable, it's too convenient to give up like all of these, like to give up this crazy little house that he's designed for himself, basically like power, functioning powered by all of his slaves. I was just, but I was kind of, I don't know, that's kind of my me drawing connections there. But I was just thinking about that in the context of soul gems, and I just thought that was really fascinating. If that makes any sense to anybody.
How dare you malign America, sir?
Listen,
No, I think
it's all
I think it's a good
you can read it. It's all there.
that's a good connection.
So you're telling me I should feel bad for having the 200 filled black soul gems in my cupboard right now?
Listen, you know. I mean, we got like I've got this, I've got this like soul gem right here. It's I mean, you know.
Except I think those usually hold our own souls.
Right, right. Yeah, I was just gonna just very briefly mention that if you're interested in the history of Venice Galarian and Manamarco, you can actually get a lot of that story in the ESO expansion Somerset. Best expansion in the game, by the way. Uh, but also, just I wanted to make one other quick point about talking about the soul gems, and we were talking about the soul cairn earlier, and the idea of death not being the worst thing that could happen to you. Uh, it's been a very long time since I've played Dawnguard, but I vaguely remember there were quite a few NPCs you could talk to in there that were basically just trapped because they were trapped by a black soul gem, and a lot of them I'm sure would definitely prefer death over being basically tormented essentially in this realm of purple light all the time, but yeah, I definitely think that the whole soul gem concept as a whole, even the ones for just animals and non-sentient beings, is kind of disturbing, because the implication is that even non-sentient beings in the Elder Scrolls have a type of soul, and that means that if you're trapping these animals, you're essentially holding them against their, not, I wouldn't say will, because if they're not sentient, they don't really have a will, but it, if it's an unpleasant experience for fully sentient beings to be trapped, then I'm sure that they're kind of suffering to an extent if they're if they're just animals, and of course that could go into a discussion about like animal cruelty and all of that. But yeah, the whole soul gem concept is definitely very disturbing the more you look into it. I mean, they look cool in the game, but that's about it.
And then you don't get relief for your battery life efforts. You just go straight to the soul cairn. Like,
Exactly.
Congratulations.
I mean, I did appreciate what's his name? Is it Saint Jube, or well, how do you say his name?
Something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, well,
I would say Jub.
whatever his name is. I've always appreciated his inclusion in that as somebody who entered Elder Scrolls through Morrowind. I really appreciate that they worked in the hate for the Wind Racers into the story so organically. Although I never did collect all of his pages.
I also loved how they canonized him as a saint for doing that.
Right. That was a good touch.
It's so funny.
Uh, well, is there anything else pressing to talk about Dawnguard before moving on to Dragonborn, which I probably have even less to mention actually, because I agree with Jacob. I like Dawnguard more, but yeah, anything else to say about Dawnguard?
You apparently can get an armored troll in the game. What, I did not
Yes.
remember that at all. I don't remember that at all. Like I was looking at that, that blew my mind.
You
Yes,
can
if you
miss
join the
most,
Dawnguard.
yeah, you can miss most of, even if you join the Dawn Guard, you can miss most of the content because it's off to the side and you can just
Mhm.
plow through the story and not do any of it. And there's actually some little fun things to do, like yeah, armored trolls, and there's some huskies that you can get and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Well, one thing just that I liked about Dawnguard was the sequence in the Forgotten Vale, because it was so juxtaposed. Dawnguard as a whole is a very gothic, dark DLC because I mean, it's vampires, and then you get this brief segment of the game or the DLC where you go to this place that's very serene, very beautiful to look at, and I always thought that was a really it was a moment that really stuck with me. I think maybe more than the rest of the DLC, even though the Forgotten Vale is only a tiny little piece of the whole story. It just stuck with me because of how much of a dichotomy there was between that really peaceful, uh, beautiful segment and then the rest of the whole DLC, which is very dark and bloody and all of that. But
Dawnguard's got cool vibes.
Dawnguard does have cool vibes.
good summary.
Yeah.
I think as a quick aside, I think Andrew, I'm so sorry, man. My ADHD deleted your name from my brain for like 2 seconds. I think Andrew. What I'm getting from all of this is that he would maybe like Vampire the Masquerade.
It's possible. Yeah, I've never played, but yeah, I mean, I like vampire stuff. It's not like one of my main things, but I enjoy it, and
Sure.
I like the vibes of Dawnguard. Whether I'm making my evil vampire playthrough or the righteous go kill the undead, both of them I think have a certain appeal to them. Um, all right. Well, now as we turn to Dragonborn, need a little sugar hit, so I'm switching franchises with my Sunset Sarsaparilla here. But for this one, honestly, I like the return to Solstheim. Again, as a Morrowind guy, I enjoy that aesthetic. I like getting back there, having some of those Morrowind vibes coming through. Uh, Beyond that, I personally don't find Dragonborn very compelling. I don't really like doing it very much. But I don't know. That's my pretty lame opening thoughts here. Tyler, what do you have to say here?
So I just played through it this past week, and I was kind of amazed at how very, very, very short the story is.
Yeah.
Like it's like three missions and then you're done. It's like, all right.
Really?
I mean, it's
I don't
probably
Pretty
more
short.
than
remember.
that.
Yeah.
It's probably more than that, but I'm pretty sure I spent like less than an hour plowing through the main story. I mean, because you could have, but the appeal of Dragonborn is more of Solstheim related content than I think the actual story itself. Because just it's a fun tie to, and also in a way you get to see some of the changes in Dunmer culture after the tribunal have passed, and you hear about the reclamation is what I think that they call it, where back to worshiping the good Daedra. And 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 then getting a little bit more into just kind of the aftermath of what happened to the island, after the Empire withdrew, and yeah, and just there's a lot of little fun little nuggets there. But for the story itself, like, yeah, you go to you pretty much can get away with going to Apocrypha twice, and that's the story. Where there are, I think, five black books in total that you can get and explore, that plane of oblivion more. But and yeah, so but I do like the seeing Hermaeus Mora more involved in a story. It just kind of exploring that idea, or just the idea of what that Daedra represents to the world. And I think just that in general could be enough to explore. But I also did write down quite a bit of Skull stuff again because I can't help myself but be in love with the Skull, because I pretty much end most of my playthroughs throwing on the Skull clothes and just retiring in their little village and being happy, communing with the Allmaker for the rest of my Dragonborn's life. So that's that's usually how it ends. But I've got some more Boethius ties here if we're if we're interested.
Go for it.
I'll need a second here. Hold on. Got to get through this document here. Um,
Molag Bal is oh god. Get off Dawnguard. Hermaeus Mora, not Molag Bal. Not Molag Bal. Hermaeus Mora is one of my favorite Daedric princes in Oblivion in Elder Scrolls.
Why is that?
I just think he's cool. Like I like it, like just very broadly, very simply. So I like kind of like Lovecraftian eldritch beings. So I think he's cool. Just like just an amalgamation of eyeballs and tentacles and mysterious knowledge. Like just kind of very very simply, just that just kind of I like that sort of stuff just in fiction.
And he's kind of, in a sense, I would say maybe like one of the most different of the Daedra 2 in that he doesn't, just even the way that's presented to you, because many of the other Daedra take on bestial or humanoid forms, whereas Hermaeus, I almost did it too. Hermaeus Mora is this abyss of eyeballs and tentacles and also too, I just, as far as like the gameplay goes, you can never skip the dialogue. You're just plowing through it. You have to sit there and listen, which
For
in a
so
way is like,
long.
in a way uh, is kind of in a way genius of the developers if it was intentional because it forces you to like dread this thing and it's just a very interesting thought. But yeah, there's and two, just like this idea of like, Apocrypha is there for you. Oh, scholar, go on in. Like, have a look. You'll find what you're looking for, but you'll never find what you're looking for. And it talks of like many of those seeking knowledge get lost in Apocrypha forever because they're just looking for that final bit that will round off their ability to know what they need to know. And it's just unending lust for knowledge that you get while you're there. And his wanting to ensnare you into your curiosity and ambition and believing that the knowledge will provide some sort of salvation, but in the end you get stuck in his grasp because he's trying to extract as much from you as he can because he wants to add to his hoard of knowledge. And anyways, it's just a really cool. Yeah.
I appreciate that framing. As someone in academia, there are many such cases to put that succinctly of that draw to knowledge for the sake of identity, but ultimately the kind of quest that ultimately consumes your identity, much as if you think of like the Faustus essentially, where you're selling your soul for knowledge that's never going to allow you to actually know what's truly worth knowing, right? Yeah, I'm just repeating what you said. So I think that's a good point.
Yeah, then I guess getting into when I was playing the game, the so there was one quote that so Storn is the shaman of the skull, and part of the story is that Hermaeus Mora will give you the last bit of what you need to go fight Miraak, the first Dragonborn. If in return he gets the secrets of the skull, like he's trying to get this last vestige of knowledge from the skull that he needs, and so Storn is willing to give that up because he sees the folly or the danger of Miraak. And so he says, it is the only way to free Solstheim forever from Miraak's shadow. There comes a time when everything must change. Nothing that lives remains the same forever. And so, do not fear me, my daughter. This is the destiny that the Allmaker has laid out for me. And so that made me think, just in our chaotic world that we live in, and this is something I like even try to bring to a lot of my counseling sessions, especially when we're doing Christian counseling, because it's easier to try and do this, that we get stuck in this chaos of the world that we're living in. Everything seems so random and nature itself is pushing us and pulling us in different ways. And even looking at the Skal themselves, like they subject themselves to a life that is able to, that they're able to die from things that civilized people don't die from, right? That they are killed by snowstorms when everyone else has houses, or the wolves will get them while they're gathering firewood. But most of the civilized world doesn't need to deal with that. and and so it tied in like really try to ground in the people and my people in this in the unchanging. Like there's trying to ground them in something that is stable and I think that in a way the scholar talk about like the Allmaker is like like a river where the souls are flowing in and out, but it's like this steady flow and there's this steady will and there's steady something happening with the Allmaker that is tied to the land that they're trying to live in harmony with. Um, yeah, and so I just found it interesting, like this, like things are changing, things will change. I have to do this. This is the will of the Allmaker, and it'll be okay. And it was just an interest. It just got me thinking more about that in general. And then I guess the quote from Boethius is, you know, is from book three. Is it? Uh, so nature's fixed order could not proceed on its path, and various kinds of change could not exhibit motions so orderly in place, time, effect, distance from one another in nature, unless there was one unmoving and stable power to regulate them. So for this power, whatever it is through which creation remains in existence and in motion, I use the word which all people use, namely God. And so like this there's something stable. There has to be something foundational, something stable here. Because even in like in the Elder Scrolls world, there has to be something there to keep the thing flowing, to regulate this chaos. Because if not, wouldn't if the object was in motion, wouldn't entropy take its way and it would just all unravel? What's holding it together? But yeah.
Yeah, and you find this idea not only in explicitly in Christian philosophy, such as in the likes of Boethius, but I mean, even go to the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus, who says that all of existence is like a river that's constantly moving, and so you can never step into the same water twice. You step into the river, step out, you step back in, you're in new water now. And he says this is what all of existence is like, except if everything is given over to change, then there's at least one thing that doesn't change, namely the principle of change itself. That all things may be continually moving, but things move in an orderly, predictable kind of manner. And so when you understand the principle of change behind the moving river, well, now you actually can understand the river. And his the word he uses for this stable reality is the logos, the word. Same idea that we see at the beginning of John's Gospel in Archeion Hologos. In the beginning was the Word, and so you find this idea all the way back in Heraclitus that when in a world that is constantly changing, there must be something that's not changing. And the path of wisdom is anchoring yourself in that which does not change, because when you are anchored in that which does not change, then changing fortune can't actually do you any harm. Socrates says, looking down the court of Athens that's about to execute him, you cannot do harm to a good man because one who is based in goodness, well, that relationship can only be severed if he were to play the coward and run away from it, if he were to break that relationship, but it cannot be taken away by external means. And so, yeah, I think that's a good connection. And, you find those ideas in a lot of the Northern tales that the Skull are obviously swept up in or inspired by. Look at the likes of Beowulf, where Beowulf is able to just throw himself into any danger, not always guaranteed of temporal victory, but as long as he is playing the heroic role that he is meant to play, well, he figures that's good enough. God's going to decide what the consequences are, or fate is going to decide what the consequences are, because sometimes the religion of Beowulf is a little bit vague, intentionally so. But nonetheless, the point is that things are going to work out that the way that they're going to work out. My job is to do what I need to do. It's a very anti-consequentialist sort of philosophy, very virtue-based. And I think that there is a lot of power in that, in recognizing that strength is in virtue, regardless of changing circumstance. And again, so many of these points that I'm making, I'm really just echoing what Tyler's saying here. So everyone go read Boethius.
There's this really cool course, Life, Death, and Meaning, that you can take on the Mythic Mind.
Yes, patreon.com/Mythic Mind, everybody.
Like, comment, and subscribe.
Yes. Um, yeah, and by the way, just for a little plug, I will be unloading that course on the podcast starting in the beginning of the new year. So look forward to that. I don't know, anything else about Dragonborn? Maybe somebody can tell me. I kind of led with this question last time of who is Alduin. I think this will be an easier question. Who is Miraak? Because I honestly, I've played this not recently, but I've played through the DLC a number of times. I still don't really know.
All I know is he's supposedly the first Dragonborn. That's about all I know about him.
So Dariloth did a really fun little video, just kind of like Dariloth was like a history student in college, so he likes to kind of like take his education and apply it to like how he does his like Elder Scrolls like lore videos. He did a fun little exercise on kind of like how we like study and research and like test history. Like he kind of took like those principles and he applied it to Miraak and did a fun little exercise. Like I'm not gonna like go through the video, like, but basically he does this little exercise on, was Miraak really the first Dragonborn, or is this kind of like a thing of legends and myth and propaganda, or whatever, like what do the sources say? And it was a fun little exercise. His conclusion was basically that there is kind of like academically, historically, there is room for probable doubt that he is not necessarily like the first Dragonborn. Uh, Simply put, I think for the purposes of the story that really just kind of like matter to us, like he may as well be the first Dragonborn. And we kind of talked about how like what a Dragonborn is just kind of like it's kind of up to like kind of like what Akatosh is kind of planning or trying to do in that particular given moment and place and time, and whatever, simply that they just a Dragonborn is somebody who has Akatosh's blood for one reason or another, one calling or another. And if I remember right, his like his initial, I think he was called by Akatosh to be Alduin's like original slayer, to be Alduin's kind of like original, like kind of like the hand of judgment on like a fallen, corrupted Alduin that had kind of like kind of strayed from his nature, as we kind of talked about in the Skyrim episode. And he doesn't do that. Like we have this theme of betrayal where he kind of betrays the calling of Akatosh for his own gains in pursuing kind of like the power and knowledge that God, almost did it again, that that Hermaeus Mora provides. But we know he was a dragon priest, and like I don't know, like, and the dragon priests were basically kind of like the intermediaries for the dragon tyrants and their human subjects in the it was the Merethic era, right? But that's kind of the simple version of it. I don't know how much more there is. There's a cool legend where he kind of goes to war with another dragon priest, and their power of the, according to legend anyway, their power of the voice separated Solstheim from the mainland and made it the mainland of Skyrim, and made it the island that it is now. If we know, like Elder Scrolls, unreliable narrators, blah 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 blah. If the legends are to be believed, and in this world of myth and magic, we've got about as much reason to trust in these stories as we do not to. That's kind of the fun of it. But yeah, he like his job was to kill Alduin, and then he didn't do that, and then Molag Bal yoinked him to Apocrypha and made him his plaything, and then he was trying to betray uh Hermaeus Mora. Did I call him Molag Bal again? So yeah, anyway, like, comment, and subscribe. this is what you come here for, folks. Anyway, but yeah, he was trying to portray Hermaeus Mora and escape. So Hermaeus Mora makes you his new champion. I think is kind of the gist of that. Is that about right? Jacob, Tyler, somebody help.
Sounds about right.
There's a lot of interesting there is like interesting lore there, especially kind of like with Solstheim as Tyler was talking about. I did not really by the time like I loved Dawnguard, but by the time Dragonborn came out, I was kind of done with Skyrim and I didn't really give it the time of day or the attention that it deserved. Like I did not explore Solstheim at all. I didn't have the patience. I didn't have the connection to Morrowind at that time. So like I didn't care. I just wanted to get the main story done and over with, and I remember it being kind of a slog. There was cool stuff. Like I think I would have liked it more if I wasn't burned out at the time. Again, I do want to give Dragonborn a fair shake and see if my opinion changes on it. But does that answer your question, Andrew, on Miraak?
Yeah, yeah, and I need to give it another shake too. I look forward to returning to some of these things now that a lot of my perspective on game storytelling and things is different than it was when I last played through these things, and so I look forward to that. Although I just feel like Apocrypha, you can get some cool perks from it, but I feel like it's just more fade stuff.
I was really excited to go to Apocrypha because, like, again, I was interested to see her Hermaeus Mora's world. So like I was interested in seeing that. I think the bummer for me, well, I think the bummer for me was that it was, Tyler was talking about. It's kind of a linear dungeon,
Yeah.
so you don't. So like some of the magic of it being a world unto itself is kind of lost. Not that I wanted like this big, huge whole other like apocryphal place to explore necessarily, but it would have been nice if it was not a corridor.
I yeah, in a sense, like when you think of what that world would be, you would think more of a labyrinth. But
Yeah.
and they tried to give the illusion of a labyrinth by making these different, effects happen. But in the end, like you know where you're going.
It really was the fade, wasn't it? I didn't even think
Yes.
about that until Andrew said it. Oh my gosh, yeah. You know what is funny though? I was just thinking about Miraak's actually kind of a punk. Like he couldn't even win the battle with the other dragon priest. Like he had to be saved by his Daedra. And then like if you like he chose not to fight Alduin for one reason or another. Like, we don't really know because we weren't really there.
Well, and
You
just
know,
to interject real quick too,
yeah.
like at the very beginning is like, oh, I could have done that, but I
Yeah,
chose a different path.
yeah, I think that's a line you get if you have already killed Alduin. Like he doesn't say it if you haven't killed Alduin yet. I don't know what he says in place of that, but
He
if you've
then just
killed
makes fun of you if you didn't
yeah,
kill Alduin.
but he's like, "Oh, I could have done it." It's like, dude, shut up. Like and then you punk him. Like, it's for being somebody as apparently as powerful as he is, like he's really not all that, apparently.
Well, to play devil's advocate here, uh, Miraak is more of a just he's just quote unquote just a dragonborn, whereas you look at the last dragonborn in Skyrim and it's heavily implied that it's a Shezarene, and if that's the case, then he's probably got a little bit more power or a little bit more um, destiny, I guess, to wipe the floor with him. I don't know, but
There is a case to be made. Like I don't know how much evidence there is, but I do agree with you there. There is a case to be made that every player character is potentially a Shezarene in some form. Like that's a whole thing that we really don't have time to get into. Basically like an incarnation of Lorcan, a mover and shaker of change in the world. But yeah, it's kind of a like there's definitely some merit to what you're saying there, but even so, having the power of having like the blood of Akatosh, like the power of Akatosh granted to him, and also having the power of the voice, which we kind of talked about last time, like, the full extent of the reality the reality bending capabilities of the voice is just like, not is something that's not really expressed in the games. And yet Miraak is just still kind of like, again, like
It-
he just kind of fails at everything he does.
it's unfortunate.
Practically speaking.
It because you do get to see the extent of the power of his ability to bend minds. I mean, he essentially enslaves half of the island by the time you get there to his will. It's just when you get there and fight him, it's like, well, there it is. There's your power and all it's to be. But his ability to bend minds, I mean, it really is a powerful thing, and his ability to enslave, and um, it's just, it, I wish it was more brought out because it's just so easy to beat the story. I mean, it's
Yeah.
too easy to get through, and it's kind of unfortunate because, like, yeah, the dude had slaves, the entire island enslaved, and they had anything from a Reichling to a to a Reaver to bandits to to the Skull. Like everybody was susceptible to it, and yeah.
And the best use of slaves he could come up with was like stand around these pillars.
Carry rocks.
He's not a very good slave master.
Honestly, I think that's part of the reason why I preferred Dawnguard was because the whole promise of Dragonborn was really awesome. You
Yes.
get to meet the quote unquote first Dragonborn, and you get to battle them, and it's like this really apocalyptic. It's like an apocalypse right after a potential apocalypse. But then it doesn't quite live up to that. I mean, like Ian said, there's cool stuff in it. I did enjoy it. It's just it didn't quite live up to the promise that I thought it had. At least for me,
It
I
felt like
like
it could have been more.
exactly. Yeah, I need to replay it at some point too, because like I said, it's been probably over a decade at this point. I think the first time I ever played it was when I got the Elder Scrolls Anthology because I didn't have the DLCs before I got that, and so I kind of burst through Dawnguard, and then of course I did all the grinding you needed for Hearthfire, and then I decided to go for Dragonborn as the last thing, and by that point, like Ian said, I was kind of burned out on it. Um, not the game as a whole, but just kind of on the whole grind of playing the game for hours and hours every day. So yeah, I definitely need to revisit it at some point and see how my opinion changes nowadays.
Yeah, and I would say just based off of it seemed like they spent the bulk of their development on the sandbox, on Solstheim, on the stories within the island, and then it was like, well, here's a hook to get you there. We'll wrap that up, and here's the island to play with. Because, like I said, and now actually have been being played, or I guess walked through Blood Moon. Haven't played it yet, but it was really interesting to see that you can touch on each of a lot of the stories in Blood Moon again through Dragonborn, and it's even more fun to know that these other people and like even with Karstag, like you can summon his ghost, and it's like the only actual kind of tough boss battle in the entirety of Elder Scrolls, but because he's got a lot of really cool effects that make him difficult to fight, but you can still cheese your way through it. But still, like just all these different callbacks were just really fun. And then to like being able the mead hall, the Thirsk mead hall, like you're able to either side with the Reiklings and hold the mead hall, or you can side with some Nords and you can take it over and have it be a proper mead hall again. But it's more fun to side with the Reiklings because you get one as a follower and they join you and throw spears everywhere, and it's a good time. And so there's like this, there's a lot of these little stories and Solstheim that are really interesting and fun. It's just yeah, the story itself. But having just played this past week, I was like, yeah, that's why I don't remember anything because it's like half a paragraph of content.
like I was going to ask you since you played recently about more since it'd be more fresh in your mind about Solstheim and just like how fleshed out that was as a sandbox. I was going to ask you like about that and whether or not were there any uh like how rich is Solstheim as a sandbox in Skyrim, and were there any themes that kind of jumped out to you?
It's snowy.
Yeah, there's ash and then there's snow. Uh, I guess.
Starum's pretty cool.
Oh yeah, I love my Star set right now.
Hmm.
It's pretty nice.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, yeah, I guess I don't know. I guess I don't know how to answer that really well. But I guess it it is able to pack a punch because there's a lot to do, and there's whereas like with Dawnguard, like the story itself is what's carrying you through kind of the content, and there's enough in the story. Whereas like I said, the island itself, because you can be part of the revitalization of Raven Rock, by and there's an assassination plot with the Morag Tong. Like there's
This is
um
crazy to me because again, like I didn't do any of it.
yeah.
Like I just didn't
All
have the
very,
patience at the time.
yeah.
I want to go back and
Oh,
do
here's a good one.
Solstheim for
Yeah,
Solstheim.
there's a mission where you can invest in a mining thing that requires you to keep pouring gold into this dummy who keeps losing his miners, and you leave, and then something happens, and a courier comes, and you go back, and oh, people are dead again, and oh, there's Draugr everywhere. And so there's these fun little stories and then there's Tel Mithrin, there's Neloth, he's a Telvanni, right? And so there's a little Telvanni storyline there that's I think actually the character himself is kind of funny and goofy and enjoyable to play with, or to be around. And so like yeah, there's these little things that it does in some ways, not with the richness, but it still is able to call back to some of the quirkiness of Morrowind that is enjoyable. And I think that's probably where a lot of people get the enjoyment from that actually enjoyed the Dragonborn was is more of just being able to say, "Hey, I remember that. I remember that." And there's some actually funny, goofy characters in there too that kind of make it worth it as well. But yeah.
Didn't you say that you wanted to bring up Avar Stonesinger?
Well, I guess yes, it was, you know, yeah, well, essentially in this story again, like we're able to relive Avar Stonesinger's story again. Where in Blood Moon you have this marching to the stones, where it's a little bit more concrete, where you're actually doing the tasks again in Blood Moon of what Avar Stonesinger did. But in this one, you do have to make a pilgrimage to the various stones as an Avar, and there is an adversary, and
Oh, that's cool.
the adversaries stand in the adversary stand-in is more of a Miraak, is more alluding to like Miraak as the adversary stand-in, or Hermaeus Mora, whichever, which that's kind of the whole point of the story is that, of that myth is that it's kind of a placeholder myth that just kind of keeps reliving itself over time. And I just thought that was a really cool thing that reading Avar Stone Singer actually within the Blood Moon content and then kind of reliving it again in a different way in the Dragonborn DLC is just seeing that kind of through line is always really fun in these games.
It's almost like there's a never-ending cycle of monomyth. It's like the same story just keeps playing out over and over and over again. Almost like it's like an echo of the story. I don't know.
You brought that up, but one thing I was actually going to say, I was going to fit it in wherever I could, was that with the skull and the whole concept of the all maker and the adversary, it kind of reminds me of how if you look throughout history and different cultures, they get certain aspects of the truth correct. Like, I mean, you have the flood story in a lot of cultures. There are, uh, Christ archetypes in some of the myths and stuff like that. And it kind of reminded me of that because, the Allmaker and the adversary in the Skull lore is kind of like Anu and Padme. Um, so it was kind of a reflection to me of how cultures throughout history kind of like I said, get certain aspects of the truth right, even if they don't get the whole truth right. It's like it's definitely a natural inclination of humans to look to the divine and to also carry down uh, word of mouth stories. I can't think of the word for that, but when you carry down the oral tradition, that's what I'm thinking of. But yeah, that's just what it made me think of when I was recalling the whole skull theology, I guess you would call it.
Yeah, it's cool.
Ditto.
I'm really sorry, Jacob.
No, no, it's a good point. I just don't have much to add to that. I think it is worth saying though. Now, anything else from Dragonborn before we move on to Hearthfire, of course.
I'm ready.
No, no.
Tell me about the philosophy of iron nails.
I'm scrolling through my notes. There has to be something.
Hey, you gotta be fair to Hearthfire. It does add the adoption system, so you can actually create a family in the game. So
That's true.
You child, you're mine now.
I have some gold in a house. You want to come hang out with me?
I don't think
This
I
is
ever
so
here's a
got that
wooden
good.
unfortunate.
sword.
This has gone in such an unfortunate direction.
I will say the one thing, here's a stretch, right for the stretch. The one thing I find interesting just from I do some carpentry in my life, okay? So and there is something to because this is the trap I fall into. Like the only thing I really love in Fallout 4 is just building things 'cause I just love building things. I love building things. And there really is something magical happening when you're building something. And I think now Hearthfire, it's this, rinse repeat. It's not very creative and it's done for you. And it was really disappointing because when I saw the DLC was coming, I was like, I've got this perfect spot for a house in the Rift, overseeing, East March. It's next to this pond. It's very idyllic. It's perfect. And I was like, oh, they have preset places for you, darn it. But there's really something about planting your roots and how, just how fulfilling the simple life really can be.
Yeah, and that's what I actually enjoyed about it myself was, I mean, Skyrim's such a grandiose story about, becoming essentially the savior of the world and in your era. And, one thing I always loved about the Elder Scrolls games is just the sheer freedom to essentially quite literally do whatever you want in the game. You can play you can play hours of these games just walking around the world picking up, items, making a collection of some sort. And so having the ability to not have to stay within one of the specific cities and actually kind of customize your house, even if it was pretty rudimentary, uh, it was just kind of nice to be able to do that because you could essentially retire from all the crazy adventuring and start to live a character that's basically just hanging out with your family, maybe visiting the nearest city for a bit and, protecting your family from local threats and everything like that. So, yeah, it definitely wasn't anything incredible. It was definitely very bare bones early concepts, and like Tyler was saying about Fallout 4, I enjoy building. I said in the Fallout 4 episode that I put over 1,000 hours into that game, and a good chunk of that is because of building. But yeah, I really do enjoy the ability to have a space in the game, whether that's an actual like preset player house or something you can build, because it just makes the world feel more livable. Like you actually can feel like you can live in the world and not just play a video game, if that makes any sense.
If only having a family in the game wasn't so lifeless.
Fair point.
Yeah.
Well, and two, like with some games, like there's this really what I always thought would be interesting, and that is to have like a really cool like air, like molding an air to the game where you can, pour some time into training this child to be the next champion of Skyrim,
And then
like
when you
to,
die, you play as them.
that's right. You carry on that story as the heir. Yes.
Crusader Kings does that, but it's a strategy game.
It's a
Crusader
really
Kings.
well, and it's a really fun concept that they put one of the only tabletop games I play is the One Ring, Lord of the Rings role-playing game, and there is an air uh, component to the game that actually is really actually kind of interesting and a way to carry on the game that's really fun and narratively sound and really helps with keeping gameplay moving too in case a troll smashes your face in on accident. So
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. I was thinking about how the One Ring game TTRPG has kind of like that legacy system where you can kind of like retire one adventurer and kind of pass the torch off to another, kind of like baked in to the game rules. I thought just as you guys were talking, I thought the exact same thing.
Now,
Go ahead.
oh no, I was going to say now, you said that family life in Skyrim is pretty empty, but I mean, your
Yes, it
wife can
is.
open a store and
Yes,
buy
it
your
is.
stuff. I mean, is that not the center of any good marriage?
and somehow, what if my children got a hold of an ancestor mothwing? I don't know how that happened, but they put it in a chest for me.
That's so kind.
I like to give
An
my kids shepherd's pie sometimes. That's about it.
an ancestor mothwing? I have questions.
I know.
He better not be reading Elder Scrolls with that mothwing, sir.
How's this vision?
It's
Well,
definitely it's the building. It was definitely a proof of concept for what they were going to do with Fallout 4.
yeah, I mean,
The building.
I like the building stuff. It's cool to have somewhere to, hang all your trophies and whatnot. So it's cool, but I don't know there's much to discuss about it.
I was one of those people who I didn't really have the urge to build things. So I didn't really have like the interest I didn't really have the interest. I did try, and then when I found out I couldn't have all of the rooms I wanted on the house, I had to pick and choose rooms. Like that was no bueno. I do have to say. I think I think they changed. It's definitely different in Fallout 4, I think. Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks. That's why yeah, I'm so glad I have you guys here.
Yeah.
I did
It's the
I only
Fallout system is a lot more, there's a lot more to it, and you can do automated stuff and work with electricity and have unlimited clean energy, which would completely break the entire story of New Vegas, but whatever.
in Fallout 3.
But I actually,
All of Fallout really. You're getting a water chip in Fallout 1. And it's like, and it's like, oh hey, like if we but you get there and it's like, oh no, someone else is using this water chip. If we take them, then they won't have water. Like, I'm dumping these guys to death. What do I do? Like, there was no such thing like Fallout 1, Fallout 2, Fallout New Vegas. There's no such thing as not having like a horrible moral quandary.
Well, any other final thoughts on Skyrim DLC? We will revisit Elder Scrolls stuff sometime, but in the meantime, you all are more than welcome to participate in the games podcast or anywhere else that you want to jump in. We'll be doing some more stuff with the movies and shows in the new year, but whether I see you on the Discord or in more episodes, it has been a pleasure, and I look forward to the road ahead.
I
sure,
absolutely love
yeah,
doing this with every
loved it.
single one of you guys.
Likewise, man.
And
It's awesome.
I'm really sad that the other guys like
Uh,
Kyle and uh I'm drawing a blank on some of the other guys. I'm so sorry.
yeah,
But
they kind of
but like
disappeared, but
I really do I really do miss having them here as well. I really do. But like yeah, but it was so much fun to uh like be a part of this, and I look forward to uh doing some more in the future and whatever comes next.
yeah,
Yeah.
and we'll meet together to write our book at some point.
Yes.
Got my documents
We'll like
started.
we'll make our own Elder Scrolls
Yes, we'll do it right.
philosophy. Just do it right.
That's right.
Right.
All right. Thanks, guys.